Peace and salutations, beautiful people. I hope that you are well. Welcome to The Paper Plane. The Paper Plane is a podcast created and hosted by myself, Katan Masashi Rohahio Ehara, where I interview folks I am blessed and honored to share community with, asking them about a book or books that have had a transformative impact on their lives. And in a society where literacy rates are steadily declining, our attention spans and critical consciousness are under attack, and a growing number of podcasts hosted by cishet men consciously or unconsciously champion expressions of masculinity that come at the expense of women, femmes, and LGBTQIA two-spirit plus, especially BIPOC folks. This space imperfectly aims to operate as a counter narrative to those things. The Paper Plane is a space that intends to highlight the dire importance of relationships, community, dialogue, perpetual learning, honest expression as art, art as honest expression, freedom for literacy, and of course, literacy for freedom. It speaks to planes of existence attached to the act of reading, but also as a metaphor for the flights we take as we sit in what Ta-Nehisi Coates calls a one-way interface as readers and how these journeys shape us. And so, as a middle aged dad with chronic back pain, today's guest is someone I have known, in the words of the poet and philosopher Earl E. 40 Stevens, since I was knee high to a caterpillar's toenail. Today's distinguished guest is someone I met as an undergrad at UC Santa Cruz and Oaks College, Oaks, and have been inspired by up close when organizing with People's Education Movement Bay Area and at ed conferences or professional development trainings, and from afar via social media over the last 2 decades. Today's guest continues to grow her powerful family, grow powerful communities, and grows and glows powerfully herself. Hailing from Richmond Sibling City, the indomitable Vallejo, California, this incredible educator, leader, mentor, scholar, mother, sibling, friend, comrade, community member, and golden state of mind and heart warrior is someone I am absolutely honored to have on the paper plane today. Dr. Katrina Traylor is a national board certified teacher with nearly 20 years of teaching experience in urban secondary classrooms. She began her teaching career at June Jordan School for Equity in San Francisco, where she also worked as an administrator. Katrina then worked at her former high school, Jesse M. Bethel High School in Vallejo, where she spent 8 years as the lead teacher of the Law Academy. Under her leadership, the Law Academy earned the Diversity Champion Award from California Law Pathways Advisory Council. Katrina is currently the coordinator for Teacher Residency, which is a partnership between Alder Graduate School of Equity and the Vallejo City Unified School District to recruit and train teachers specifically to work in Vallejo schools. Prior to this role, Katrina also worked as Alder's Whole Child Initiative Manager, organizing many of the core components of Alder's approach to the whole child teaching and learning. Katrina has taught high school English and history at all grade levels and loves teaching students to become engaged readers of history, literature, and the world around them. Katrina is deeply passionate about creating healing-centered classrooms through trauma-informed care practices, including restorative justice, mindfulness, and culturally relevant curriculum. Katrina holds a BA from UC Santa Cruz in American Studies, an MA in Education from Stanford's Teacher Education Program, and a doctorate in Educational Leadership from UC Davis, where she researched how Black students define and experience joy within the context of school. When she's not shaking things up in the world of education, she can be found reading historical fiction, conquering Beyonce's dance moves, or delighting at the world with her 4 young children. And it is with great pleasure that I welcome Dr. Katrina Traylor to the paper plane. Hey, Katrina, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So happy to be here with you today. And thank you so much for the gift of your time. Um, Going to jump into introducing this book that you've chosen for us to discuss today, a book that I love dearly and has meant a lot to me also for many years. And I look forward to, learning more about why you chose this book and, kind of the journeys that it's taking you on. But Trevor Noah's unlikely path from apartheid South Africa to the desk of The Daily Show began with a criminal act, his birth. Trevor was born to a white Swiss father and a black Xhosa mother at a time when such a union was punishable by 5 years in prison. Living proof of his parents' indiscretion, Trevor was kept mostly indoors for the earliest years of his life, bound by the extreme and often absurd measures his mother took to hide him from a government that could, at any moment, steal him away. Finally liberated by the end of South Africa's tyrannical white rule, Trevor and his mother set forth on a grand adventure, living openly and freely and embracing the opportunities won by a centuries-long struggle. Born a Crime, the book we're talking about today, is the story of a mischievous young boy who grows into a restless young man as he struggles to find himself in a world where he was never supposed to exist. It is also the story of that young man's relationship with his fearless, rebellious, and fervently religious mother, his teammate, a woman determined to save her son from the cycle of poverty, violence, and abuse that would ultimately threaten her own life. The stories collected here are by turns hilarious, dramatic, and deeply affecting, whether subsisting on caterpillars for dinner during hard times, being thrown from a moving car during an attempted kidnapping, or just trying to survive the life and death pitfalls of dating in high school. Trevor illuminates his curious world with an incisive wit and unflinching honesty. His stories weave together to form a moving and searingly funny portrait of a boy making his way through a damaged world and a dangerous time, armed only with a keen sense of humor and a mother's unconventional, unconditional love. And so, as we open things up here, would love to hear your thoughts on why Born a Crime is an important text to you, and what quote unquote flights and journeys would you say that it's taking you on?
Well, I think even from just the description, like there's so much in this coming of age story that I think takes us all on flights and journeys as he navigates everything that you just read in the description. But I think the number one reason is that it's you can't put it down. It's just a really captivating story. He's a brilliant writer, and it's funny. Like you literally laugh out loud while you're reading it, and I just love a book that can kind of take me through all the emotions. Like I love a sad book because it taps into my empathy, but sometimes it's too sad and I like don't want to read it because life is sad enough. And I love a funny book, but sometimes it feels too lighthearted for the times. And so
Yeah.
he does a beautiful job of really allowing the reader to experience a range of emotions and have a range of different reactions to the book. So I think those are like the journeys
Yeah.
that I go on. They're about the ways that I emotionally connect to the book and follow his story.
That's really beautifully said, and it immediately reminds me. I was just having a conversation with, I just told you that I had the pleasure of seeing Tommy Orange this morning at a
Yes.
book talking, and I was thinking about his first book that's just meant so much to me. But also, I was talking to my friend about how there were moments because there was so much heartache in it that I had to put it down. For like I can't keep going with it. I need to put this down for a little bit.
Mm,
But also the thought too of like kind of what you were sharing, like made me think about like why I like love and appreciate an artist like Kendrick Lamar so much because of like being able to span, this like wide spectrum of emotion.
mhm.
But yeah, just really beautifully said. Um, and jumping in here and with kind of thinking about, Trevor Noah's experiences, this question, speaks to, some of these pieces you were just naming. But so Trevor Noah's experiences navigating language, identity, and race in apartheid and post-apartheid South Africa are painted super vividly in his memoir.
Mhm.
And as an educator, and a leader and a mentor, how do you perceive the experiences he writes about compared to those of Black, Indigenous, and other students of color from historically oppressed communities in U.S. schools today?
So one thing that again is so great about the book is that it's a coming of age memoir, and so all the students can relate to that, regardless of kind of the identity piece. They're all navigating love to some extent and trying to have riz and figure out how to attract somebody and navigate this world. They've Many of them have experiences with pets. Trevor writes a really beautiful story about his
Yeah.
pet Fufi, uh, that takes us on a journey about our love of animals. So the coming of age piece, the moments where he's kind of him there's tension between him and his mom because he's doing what kids do and she doesn't want him to do it. So just those components alone I think are really great for young people to read. But I do think that his identity makes in his experiences allows so many different students to connect with him. So I
Yeah.
teach in Vallejo, I'm from Vallejo, like you shared, which, we are the most diverse city in the country in that we're about 25% Black, 25% white, 25% Latino, 25% Asian. So,
Mm.
and our neighborhoods are really integrated. enough about Vallejo. My point is, I've always had really diverse classes, and
Yeah.
I've worked hard to find texts that they can all connect with. I think it's important for kids to hear literature written by people from their communities, with shared experiences and historical backgrounds. And I've never had a South African student, but Trevor being Black connects to a lot of the Black students.
Mm,
Trevor being multiracial connects to a lot of the students who come from different cultural backgrounds. Um, Trevor being indigenous to that land, but also an immigrant telling the story because now he's in America. So, like, there's so many ways that our students from so many diverse backgrounds can connect to his story. He's multilingual. And so
mm.
I think just for them to kind of have this, it's the mirror of themselves, but also the sliding glass door of other people who are different, so they can find the way they connect to Trevor's character, and then also expand how they see other people. And then also, I think it's really important to read a book about South Africa from the perspective of somebody growing up there from an
Yeah.
African. I don't, I think I had parents who really did try to teach me a global understanding of the world. So I remember watching Serafina and Hotel Rwanda. So I do have these moments
Yeah.
of understanding a piece of African history, but he does a really or South African history, Rwandan history. But I think he does a good job of really talking about South African history in a broader sense and not just understanding it within the lens of apartheid, but even before apartheid and post apartheid, and just the different cultural backgrounds of all the people in Africa, and really honoring those variations in their cultures, their language, their foods. So because he writes so beautifully about all these different cultures, I think it feels really welcoming for so many students and so many people to read.
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I yeah, this word welcoming feels super apt, as far as like just how much he opens up himself to connect with so many different lenses that that you named beautifully. Um, and and then one thought I was just having just now was like thinking about how young people, thinking about, South Africa at the time that he's kind of writing and growing up, like being at the precipice, right, of apartheid falling, and like us, being kind of at this precipice of something, right? It's like hard to like fully know what's like, you know, uh, I was gonna say what comes next, but it's like, it can be difficult at times to even know what's going on right now and like have full clarity, right, about those things.
Mm,
And so, yeah, just thinking about like young people in particularly in this particular moment in time, um, and just being in this space of like, something's about
right.
to happen and is happening. Right?
And like our shadow president is South African. He's a white South African. So, they all know Elon Musk. Let's
How
talk
could I
about
forget?
the, the environment he grew up in
Yeah.
as a white South African benefiting from apartheid, and how that
Exactly.
shapes what he wants to see happen in America.
Mhm. Mm. Woo. Well, man. We could go down a whole other thing with that, but I do want to. I would love to hear your thoughts around this next piece. So in Born to Crime, Trevor's mother, Patricia Nombu Yuselo Noah plays a pivotal role in his education, moral development. Trevor Noah has spoken extensively to the importance of heeding the wisdom of Black women and especially Black mothers, and in multiple many interviews. In your experience, how might schools better support and engage parents, particularly those from oppressed, historically dispossessed backgrounds, in their children's education? What forms of community cultural wealth do parents, mothers, and maybe specifically Black mothers bring to our school communities that needs and deserves more appreciation and acknowledgement?
That's a lot. And there's
Sorry.
a lot to respond to. Um, yeah, so I think of the viral clip of Trevor Noah on his last episode with the Daily Show, where he says we really need to listen to Black women because Black women can't afford to fuck around and find out.
Yeah.
It is what comes to mind,
Mhm.
and how because of intersectionality, and not just Black women, but also often single mothers. So right, the economic component to their identity.
Yeah.
I think of Black women as also really thinking about the whole community and how often we're caring for children who aren't our own, because of how invested we are in just taking care of people in general and children specifically, means that we are kind of more likely to see a bigger picture.
Yeah.
And if I'm thinking about my own experiences, I've taught for about 20 years in urban schooling environments. And I've had a few moments where I've been cussed out by Black mamas, and they've been right. And I actually needed them to push me as an educator. I think specifically, I was in San Francisco, and I was just really compelled by code switching, by situational appropriateness in a way that I thought was liberating. But I think I was being called out to say that's your way of approaching it isn't doesn't feel like we're working towards freedom. It feels oppressive. And
Mm,
I had to have somebody call me out on that, in a way that made me, again, a better teacher for all students. So not just Black students, but like, okay, in what ways might I be silencing the students' native language, home language, in exchange for code switching so that they can have some better opportunity at success. And right, like really having to sit with that myself and
mm,
think about it. Again, I was pushed by a Black mom. And I think just in my experience with urban schools, again, there's always exceptions. I think our Latinx and Asian parents are a little bit more hands off. Not always, but a little bit more like, I'm trusting the educational system that y'all will
mm,
make the right decision. And so, in my experiences, it has been the Black moms who are pushing us to make better decisions for everybody.
mm,
And we're talking about community cultural wealth.
yeah.
It's that resistant capital that Terry also writes about, of just teaching us to push back and fight back, uh, and raising our kids to do that also. And so I want to, from that, become a teacher that also teaches the children resistant capital. And I think we learn it really well from Black women. And even in Patricia's, but going back to the book, um, she really teaches Trevor to ask questions, to push back, to not
Mm,
accept anything at face value, even from her. She's like, question me. Make sure
yeah.
that you understand why I'm teaching you the things and you don't just accept it and go with it, because then anybody can trick you.
Yeah.
So that energy of like really just, a healthy skepticism of everything, comes up a lot in the book, and I think really speaks to, so many Black mothers that I've had the privilege of working with as an educator. Like, we should
Mm,
always question a little bit and push back to make sure we're doing what's best for students.
mm, absolutely. I really appreciate the reminder around this, like, even like in my best attempts to, you know, identify, combat my own cowardice and, show up in the best, kind of most humanizing, liberatory ways possible that, I'm an agent of the state, and like, and I need young people, students, families that I'm working with, like, to remind me of that sometimes. And it doesn't always feel good, as you know very well, but, it's absolutely necessary. Um, um, in this memoir, right, Trevor Noah, right, who's, this veteran comedian, describes how humor, right, helps him to cope with, a lot of hardships, struggles, challenges. And so wondering from your experience as a teacher, principal, teacher, educator, so many things, do you believe humor can be used as a tool for engagement, relationship building, resiliency, etc., inside and or outside of the classroom for those in education?
Yes, of course. And this question like brings me to Black Twitter, which I'm not going to go on a Black Twitter tangent, but Black Twitter is like a masterclass of how to use humor to navigate all of the unprecedented drama we've had over the
Yeah.
past decade. And I do think that it's us coping and it's us surviving. I wrote my dissertation on joy, and one thing I
Yeah.
learned in my research is that we're not able to suppress negative emotions without also suppressing the positive ones.
Yeah.
So if we are able to expand our capacity for joy, we're able to also expand our capacity for dealing with negative emotions. in a healthy way, right? Negative emotions are not a problem. The problem is what caused the negative emotions, but the negative emotions are how we deal with it so that we can come back um, able to survive. And so I do think of the value of joy and humor and laughter, um, both as a way to survive any given moment, because we're
Hmm.
able to survive that moment better by laughing about it, but also just expanding our capacity for all emotions to exist so that we could, be our full selves.
Yeah.
Um, so I do think that humor really taps into our humanity, and in my dissertation, like the students finding places where they could laugh and
Mm.
finding places where they could be happy
Mm.
really meant they were finding places where they could thrive academically. So there was a connection between their ability to laugh in class and do well academically.
Mm. Um, my mind is going in a couple different directions, but as you were kind of saying that, I was remembering, not only kind of like little like news clips that I remember reading, but also just like, like research on, particularly like in the classroom, like Black students, in like joy, or like laughter being perceived as like threatening at times, or like I remember there was like this story I saw not too long ago, about it was like a group of black women friends that were like went to Napa and were like on like a
Line
wine train.
train.
Yeah, and we're just like laughing and like we're, policed, around just like even accessing that joy. Um, yeah, and I guess I'm wondering as maybe a follow-up question, kind of, um, are there ways that in any of your research, that you've, I don't know, kind of looked at or thought about, those kind of deficit-oriented ways of joy even being perceived as it pertains to Black students.
you know, um, the research, yes, supports what you're saying, is that Black students are more likely to get in trouble for behaviors that are not harmful, but are disruptive. Like if I laugh too loud, that's disruptive. If I start singing Keisha Cole in the middle of class, that's disruptive. And it might be, but also it's a great song. And if we're all singing together, that's a beautiful community moment. So
Yeah.
let's sing love together, laugh about it, enjoy each other, and then find a way to get back to work. But one thing I think has shifted is I've worked in urban schools for 20 years. So sometimes I
Yeah.
have trauma over like when I hear loud noises, I'm like, oh no, there's a fight. And I like get into like protective mode. And
Yeah.
actually, no, they're just in a circle rapping, right? No,
Yeah.
somebody's just dancing. And it's like a joyful moment. And I think sometimes teachers, because of their trauma, are like, okay, you have to break this up. I understand nothing bad was happening, but you scared me. So now you
Right.
have to stop your joyful moment. And
Yep.
I think the more and more I talk to teachers and administrators about joy, they were like, let that happy moment keep going because
Mm.
nobody's getting hurt. And my own trauma and fear of like having to break up a fight
Yep.
shouldn't stop these students from having a really warm, authentic, joyful moment.
Mm. Um, I just had like three different memories come to mind, but I'm not gonna go into them. Um, this is, and this is connected, but the book highlights, systemic inequalities that limited opportunities for Black South Africans, who are indigenous. I'm wondering what, if any, parallels you see between educational inequities in South Africa, via this memoir and those in the United States, historically, presently, both.
The historic connections are real because apartheid was modeled after Jim Crow. So
Yeah. Yep.
there are ways that for the students to understand that South Africa created this system by pulling from the segregation and racism they saw in America. It like automatically highlights the connections.
Yeah.
I feel really grateful to teach in a community where I do think students have equitable access to resources and opportunities. For the most part, there's always some inequities that we're still working to deconstruct, but that for the most part, they have more opportunities. And I think what this book helped them see was that they had the more opportunities, because the problem with the way we move as humans is that if we don't know somebody had it worse, we don't always appreciate what we have. So I grew up in a house with a dad who was born in Arkansas during sharecropping, and my dad would always go off about how lucky we were to have a bathroom in the house. And we were just
Mhm.
like, okay, like we didn't have, like as a child, it was just like, huh, sure. Um, and as an adult, now I'm like, oh, we were so lucky to have an extra bathroom in the house, but it just didn't click.
Yeah.
And so I think about the students that when they think of all these systems that were designed for them to not have academic opportunity and to see inequities as they exist in South Africa, but to look at their own schooling and say, I do have teachers who care about me. There is a restorative justice program that allows me to work through conflicts in a healthy way
Mhm.
rather than me getting expelled from school.
Yeah.
Or, everyone has the opportunity to go to school here. You don't need to be able to afford a uniform. That those things are able to highlight their opportunities more,
Mm.
and that
Yeah.
they lean into what their education can provide them, with more appreciation and intentionality than just like, oh yeah, school's important, I should take it seriously.
Mm. Mm. I love that, like yeah, like organic, like, question coming up of like, what should I, be able to do, now that I can see, these opportunities exist, or like I'm able to acknowledge them. Um, I remember like having epiphanies like that, or like that, those questions coming up for me, I think particularly when I like got to Santa Cruz, and it was, very different than West Contra Costa, Richmond Unified.
Uh-huh.
It was just like, oh my God, there's so many amazing things here that like I've never had access to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. Um, so, you mentioned, students that you've had that are, multiracial or mixed heritage. And, so while I'm not, South African and or Black African ancestry, this memoir, really resonated with me in a lot of ways. As a multiracial mixed heritage person growing up in a deeply stratified, racialized society with painfully deep history, undercurrent of white supremacy. And so, Trevor Noah often, finds himself bridging multiple cultural, linguistic worlds. Do you connect to these things personally? And if so, in what ways? And how might educators be better at bonding and bridging to create and sustain classroom environments that value students, especially BIPOC,
Mm-hmm.
humanity, identities, experiences?
Mm-hmm. Um, yeah, I think my experience as a mixed race Black American, there were ways that it was really similar and that I could connect, and also ways that was entirely different. So I think what I appreciate so much about how Trevor Noah writes about his experiences is, one, I think he really honors the value of diversity. And I think we tend to think that, like, oh, Africa's not diverse, there's just Black people, right? That, like, if you haven't learned about Africa in an appropriate way, that you might have these misunderstandings, stereotypes. But he really talks about the diversity of all the different African tribes, but also how so much of their conflict was created by white supremacy. That, like,
Yeah.
once apartheid ended and everyone was fighting for power, like, that was a consequence of apartheid and white supremacy, and not kind of like this natural what happens when there are different people together. And so I think that's really important for students to understand, that a lot of times our conflict also in communities, I mean, we've had some racial tension, not a whole lot, but it's definitely happened before,
Mm.
um, is a result of colonization and white supremacy, and not that, like, we are naturally wired to not get along.
Mhm.
So I think
Mm.
the way he talks about using language to build those bridges
Yeah.
feels really powerful, um, and is a beautiful, it really taps into the linguistic capital and community
Yeah.
cultural wealth. So when I teach the book, I teach it through the lens of Tarioso's community cultural wealth. So
Oh, that's awesome.
look at how he uses linguistic capital, um, to navigate situations, whether it's somebody's about to jump him, so he speaks their language so they don't, or somebody doesn't think he should be in a store, so he speaks their language so they leave him alone.
Mhm.
We talk about resistant capital, like we shared with his mother, and then just how he uses community and family, and aspirational capital. I'm like going on a tangent now, but the
No, I
way
love it. Keep going.
the way his mom has really profound aspirations for him
Mm,
in an environment that most parents aren't able to cultivate these aspirations because it just feels so overwhelmingly daunting to be able to overcome the circumstances that they've had to survive. And she's
mm,
still like, I'm going to show my son the world. So he knows it's out there. I don't know that I can get him there, but I need him to know it exists. Like that aspirational capital is why Trevor Noah is so successful. Um, so anyway, I just love using community cultural wealth through this text because it
yeah.
highlights the value of community and all the beautiful things our community has to offer, even when we don't have financial capital, which he didn't,
Absolutely.
his families didn't, his cousins didn't. Like he talked about growing up in neighborhoods where, you know, you build your house one wall at a time. Like you
Yeah.
start with just one room, and then
Mm,
maybe after several years, you're able to put up another wall and another wall, and finally a roof, and now you have a second bedroom. And so even within that severe level of poverty, there's so much other community capital to tap into. And so I think that's really important for kids. I think it's important for all of us, especially like you talked about, we are on the brink of something that is going to harm our communities. And so, how do we make sure that we lean into the wealth we do have, even if it's not financial, to take care of each other and support
mhm.
each other? And that has to happen
Yeah,
across cultural lines. Um,
absolutely.
and we live, you know, you and I live in really diverse communities. So if we can tap into our cross cultural relationships, then we're gonna be all right.
Mhm.
uh, but I think he does a great job of showing that, like, how what connects us, it sounds cliche, but how what connects us as humans is so greater than what divides us culturally.
Mhm. Yeah, no, so beautifully said. And it was like I was flashing back to like moments in the book where like the navigational capital came to mind around like when he's like briefly arrested, if
Mhm.
memory serves me, and like he was in the memoir sharing that like there were a lot of the mixed folks in that particular area where like had make potential connections to like organized crime or gangs, and he
Mhm.
was like not about that life at all, but it like in that moment made sense for him to pretend like he was, and he kind of put
Mhm.
on airs to keep himself safe. And then also him like talking about like with his friends, and this was like like 'cause I DJ'd for many years, and like him and his friends, like, throwing parties and then like burning CDs and selling them, and just like just figuring out, how to kind of like, yeah, like take advantage kind of wherever he was, and also how he tapped into, interpersonal relationships, to build community and or keep himself safe as he did so.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
and his mom like would dress up as a maid when she lived in Johannesburg, I think,
Yep.
um, so that she could move about the city because she wasn't a maid, she was a secretary, but she couldn't freely walk through the city as a secretary. So she wore a maid's outfit while she was out, so they would leave her alone. So, like, so much navigational capital examples of it in the book.
Goodness. If I'm not mistaken, didn't like if like she went out with Trevor's dad, she like would walk like, steps behind him, pretending to be like the maid and was like his nanny. Oh my goodness.
Yes, they had to keep their distance. And then one time Trevor didn't know and he was running through the park yelling, Daddy, Daddy. And they were like, Stop, don't call
I
him
remember
that.
that now. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So, and again, this is really painful, heavy, like circumstances that he writes about in a way that we can laugh and like sit with. That was really fucked up. And, you know, we are able to laugh and learn and grow from it. And I do think that's important
Mhm.
in life is to be able to, and we've already talked about this, but find the humor where we can so that
Yeah.
we can survive all the pain that we also have to endure.
So well said. And it was making me think about too, just like how and many, millions of people at this point, experience the joy that he exudes, the like love that kind of pours out of him despite all these things. It's really just like amazing.
Yeah.
Um, And let's see, when it, kind of bringing it back to teaching practice, as a, as a scholar, as a teacher educator, are there any lessons from Born a Crime, or yeah, or maybe what lessons from Born a Crime would you encourage new teachers to take into their practice, especially when working with students from historically dispossessed backgrounds, communities of color?
So I love this book because the kids love it. Like it teaches
Yeah,
itself. So I always tell new
I
teachers,
will.
like if you're struggling to come up with a lesson plan every day, which is a real struggle when you're a first year teacher,
Yeah,
Trevor Border Crime, just like it teaches itself. The kids come to class excited to read, they're looking forward to it. And there are so many opportunities to have important conversations that are relevant to their everyday lives. So um, the issue of domestic violence, not just what his mother had to survive with her abusive ex husband, but also Trevor being hit consistently by his mother. And it's clear he respects her, he loves her, he understands why he did it. It's also clear that it wasn't really impactful. Like he says, like the hitting never, like I was still bad. It didn't help. But his mom, as the book goes on, doesn't hit his younger brothers. And
mm,
so the students who start the book, like, yeah, that's why he has to get hit. Like, that's why, blah, blah, blah. This is how you learn. This is, who are really staunchly like pro hitting kids. At the end, we're like, well, then why did she stop doing it? And that's a really powerful conversation to have about what, and I think it's just really beautiful that as a mother, she evolved. And it's
yeah,
clear she's always just trying to do what's best for her kids. But when she has new information and new experiences, she adapts her parenting to reflect that. So, lots of conversations about domestic violence and the first page of the book tells you that his mother gets shot by her ex-husband or by his stepdad. So this is not a spoiler, but that is part of the story.
yeah,
And it's really important for young people to have that conversation, especially when we live in a time where kind of hypermasculinity is reemerging as something that should be desired by young men and that young women should be attracted to. And so it's just really important to kind of have those conversations of dominance and control
yeah,
um, and the consequences of that.
absolutely.
Um, and then just violence in general, like violence is back in the backdrop of this whole book. It's not
Mm-hmm.
center stage, but it is always there, whether it's the violence in his home or the violence in his community. Like he talks really vividly about, when there would be riots in the streets and they would have to try to figure out how to get home through them and get home safely. So just thinking about community violence, domestic violence, there's so many powerful conversations that students can have that's grounded in the text, but allows space for them to bring in their personal experience to really come to a profound understanding about the impacts of violence on our communities, on our families, and on our well-being. I also think the conversation around religion is really interesting, and
Yes, please say more about that.
yeah, so again, he tells you from the beginning his mom is incredibly religious. They go to multiple churches on Sunday. There's church every day. She prays all the time. Um, but like we said, she invites him to challenge her. And she says, I have to be able to justify my religious beliefs to you so that you know they're real and that
Mm,
you can believe them because you believe them and not just because I'm telling you to. So the whole book is them like having this conflict about religion where, he wakes up and the car's broken and he's like, well, I guess God, understands why we won't be at church today. And she's like, no, God just wants to make sure that we don't let obstacles stop us from getting to church today. And then they go off on their journey to try to get to church. And it's clear the whole book that he's skeptical.
yeah.
And it's clear the whole book that she's convinced. And there's
Mm,
room for both of them to exist. Like
totally.
you don't have to end the book like, see, he was right. She was doing too much. Or
Yeah.
end the book like, see, she was right. That's why, God is everything. Like there's room to exist in the middle, which I really appreciate, especially when we're bringing text to young people, that they can really grapple with both sides and feel comfortable being in the middle of the two different perspectives.
Mm,
So all that to say, like I just think there's so many great conversations that this book, evokes, and you don't have to do anything except create like a safe space for students to engage and talk about it, and then they are, and they're citing the pages because it's that good, it's that captivating.
Mm, mm. Um, I'm thinking about and when, recently, like I lost, a former student. It was, continues to be just tremendously painful, not just for me, of course, his family, the community. But I also think about like my own childhood and losing a lot of, people I loved really young, particularly when I was in fourth grade, around 10 years old. And having, this wrestling with like, like does God exist and all of this kind of skepticism around faith. But then also like particularly recently, this last period of my life, like these like kind of incredible like things happening that feel like so hard for me to like really explain that it feels like there's something with the universe, a higher source, creator, something, right? And just like all the wrestling that I've been doing, that you're speaking to in this memoir of just like, it doesn't have to be one or the other. Um, and so yeah, I appreciate that reminder.
And I
Um,
think it's really beautiful for 15-year-olds to have that experience because they're also grappling with it, I'm sure.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
so to see that like it's okay to push back, it's okay to ask questions, and it's okay for the way I understand spirituality to be different than my parents, to be different than my friends, because this is me, and I can kind of understand the world in the way that serves what I need from it. So I think, my hope is that they're able to contend with that from a healthier space as we discuss it in class.
Mm. Yeah, and yeah, I'd continue to grapple, and I think you would probably agree that, it's like a really difficult space to be in, but it's a necessary, space to kind of be in this perpetual like um, not being rigid, not being like this is what the answer is, around approaching all of these things. Um, because, I think like, even just recently, I'm like teaching my students in community college about like Paulo Freire and like, talk about like a naive consciousness, right? That Freire talks about, as far as like, if you believe everything is like some higher power and it's all fate, right? That like, he calls that a naive consciousness because of the ways that, it can potentially, um, make folks unable or unwilling to identify systems that, you know, Ruth Wilson Gilmore calls racism,
Mhm.
um, you know, systems that's, send certain constituencies to premature death, right?
Mm.
And so like how do we hold those things and also see like just like powerful liberatory things that have existed
Yeah.
in via faith, right? And tapping into those things.
Mhm.
And not, not becoming too rigid as we examine it all. But
Yeah. That's a lot. And it's like you said, like you're still evolving. It's not like you're like, oh, I figured it out now. It's like, okay, there's still more to learn, there's still more to understand, and still ways that we're shifting.
Mhm, mhm. When and you alluded to this a few times already, but you designed a curriculum around Born a Crime, and so you spoke to community cultural wealth. I'm wondering, like, if there's other themes or like lessons did you emphasize, or like were your favorite pieces of this curriculum? Um, and you spoke to this already a little bit, but like, how have you encouraged students to connect to Trevor Noah's story in their own lives? And what would you say you've gained from these experiences while you did so?
So the last time I taught it, it was a course where we intentionally did not read anything written in academic English. So our first
Ooh,
story was
oh no.
was The Word by Lee Tanucci, the writer from Hawaii who writes in Pidgin. So we
Mm,
read a story in Pidgin. And then we read A Raisin in the Sun, which is written in Black English. We read Zoot Suit, which is Chicano Spanglish, but like really specific to the time period. So we're
sure.
like, there were times none of us knew what these characters were saying. Who knows? ChatGPT didn't know either. So, but um, And then we read Born a Crime, which was the most academic English of all of them, but he's constantly writing in different languages, even if we don't know the language, right? He's putting them on paper. If you're listening to the audio, he's saying them and then often translating for the reader. And so the point was to really explore. And again, like I said at the beginning or towards the beginning of the podcast, like it was a Black mom who pushed me away from like really emphasizing code switching to like
Mm,
be yourself and be dynamic in what you say, regardless of what dialect you're using. And so now, again, I've created a whole course where we're intentionally seeking out texts that do that well.
mm,
Um, so I think by the end of the academic year, the students feel much more grounded in how they speak and in their voice and how powerful their voice is, regardless of their ability to code switch. And I love that for
mm,
them. And that what also comes up a lot as we go through these texts, we talk a lot about generational trauma
mhm.
and generational healing.
Yeah.
So that if trauma is passed down through the DNA, then the trauma we inherit is not our fault.
Yeah.
And healing can also be passed down. So how do we do the healing so that we're breaking the cycle of generational trauma? So um, the students will make fun of me because every I'm always bringing things back to generational trauma. Um,
Mm,
and one time a student was like, "We're always talking about generational trauma." Another student was like, "Because we all got it and we're all trying to heal from it." And it was like they had this little argument, and you could tell that like these words were like little seeds that I had planted. But he was like really advocating for like this is how we heal. So I love those moments, and I think I think Trevor Noah does such a good job of even with the man who shot his mom in the face, of recognizing his humanity and his pain. So this isn't just an evil person who does evil things, but this is somebody who is navigating their own trauma and hasn't healed, so they're passing it on. And I think what that does for young people is gives them a little bit more compassion for their own parents, for their
mm,
grandparents, in a way that is also healing.
yeah.
And so my hope is that any class I teach, and I think this book lends itself to it, that the students are recognizing the historical moments that created our current moment and how to heal from that so that we're creating historical moments that will create better present moments, if that makes sense.
Mm, mm-hmm.
So my hope is, I mean, I didn't have to encourage students to connect it to their own lives because they did, because
Yeah.
it's a coming of age story with a person who we already talked about all the identities. Like it's so easy for them to make that connection. Um, and then to pull from it what they need to kind of be better, not even better, but just more compassionate, more empathetic, more understanding, more proud, like to
Yeah.
have pride in their experiences and who they are.
Mm,
Um, and yeah, it's always been like I love it. I get so much from hearing them talk about it and hearing how
mm.
they grapple with things. And one thing about teaching, and you maybe have experienced this also, is the kids are so different. Like after 20 years, like they're not the students I taught 20 years ago. They're not the students I taught
Yeah,
10 years ago. And these
for
post
sure.
learning kids are not the students I taught 5, 6 years ago. And so it's always something new. We're always having new conversations. And it's through literature that I can better understand how they see the world so I can meet them there and help them envision a better one.
Mm, that's gorgeous. Well, where my mind went when you were kind of sharing also was like I know we've been talking a lot about how say like we connect to the text or how students connect to the text, and you were speaking to also just like um, how folks were showing up with each other. I was a question I had as a follow-up was like in what ways did you see this book increasing connections between the students in front of you to any degree?
You know, I I don't know. I don't know that it was the themes in this book as much as just the process of reading in community.
Hmm.
And it's something that we've lost. It's like
Oh, yeah.
as in education that we're not like reading full text. It's like here's an article, answer these
Oh,
questions.
heartbreaking.
But like diving into a text that has so many levels, so many themes, so many different stories within it, so many different perspectives, so much history. And they all were on this journey together as we read it. And so just coming to class, like when they would walk in and see that the room was in a circle and they're like, we're going to talk about the book. Like they're so excited because they actually yearn for that human connection to just sit and talk about a shared experience through reading the book and how they're experiencing it. And so I think because the book has so many different places that we can have a great conversation, the students just love to come to class and talk about it. And they didn't always agree. Like I had students who left feeling really upset that Trevor Noah didn't go seek revenge on the man who tried to shoot his mom.
Mm,
Then there was
hmm.
another kid was like, have y'all been reading this book? Like that's not the person he is. Like remember in
Mm,
chapter 9 when he did, and they're like really pulling from the character development to say this is why people make different decisions than you might make. I can understand why you might feel like you would want to go take revenge on the person who shot your mom in the head, but you're not Trevor Noah and he had different experiences. So hearing students really push each other's thinking, to understand different perspectives and different responses,
yeah.
like there's nothing more beautiful than that because that's what they should be doing. It shouldn't be me. Like it should be them holding each other
Mm,
accountable because that's their
mm,
community. They're going to grow up together. Their kids are going to go to school together. So it's their job to really build the type of relationships with each other that they want for our
mm,
community. So I again, I think the book lends itself really well to be able to create those opportunities for students to just talk and engage with the book,
yeah.
in different ways.
Yeah, well, and and you keep highlighting, how incredible of a book it is and it teaches itself, but I also just want to explicitly state just like, you're a bomb ass teacher and just like, not every student goes into classrooms and sees the chairs in a circle and feels excited about it. So I just wanted to, yeah, thank you and tip my cap. Because I know that, you created, these spaces for folks to be excited about these important stories. Um, and not all teachers know who Keisha Cole is either.
They should if they live in the Bay, but
I'm
okay.
saying, right? Well, on that note, as we kind of slowly start to close out, I'm wondering what is it generally the last questions I end with. What is a song, musical artist, and or an album that you would pair with this book, Born a Crime?
It's cliche, but it would be Beyonce's "The Gift" album. It's her
Mm,
African inspired album that came out after The Lion King.
mm-hmm,
Uh, there's a lot of problems. The Lion King takes place in East Africa, and she had a lot of artists from West Africa and South Africa, and it doesn't. There's ways that it didn't speak to the real setting of the fictional film.
mm-hmm,
However, I do think the themes in the story about really tapping into your legacy, about familial capital, about kind of embarking on the worlds and being able to come back home. And Trevor Noah writes this book and dedicates it to his mother. And the gift, it's called the she turned it into a film, Black is King, and dedicated it to her son. So it's kind of the reciprocal um, dedication, and I think that's really beautiful. So I'm sure there is a better South African artist who wrote a better collection of work that might be paired beautifully, but with the music catalog that I have, it would have to be Beyonce's The Gift.
excellent choice. And and finally, would love if you could complete the following sentence. People should read Born a Crime by Trevor Noah because dot dot dot.
Because you won't want to put it down. And we all need a book that we just want to kind of get lost in, especially right now. And it'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry, it'll make you wonder, it'll make you learn, it'll make you grow. And we didn't even talk a whole lot about how much history we get in the book.
Yeah.
Um, So I think just leaving with a better understanding, not just of South Africa, but Africa as a continent, the effects of colonization. You won't leave your experience, or you will leave it different than you started. Like it will change you, and you'll be better because of it.
Mm, beautifully said. Dr. Katrina Traylor, thank you so, so much for being my guest today on the paper plane. So appreciate it.
I just want to add real quick, the book is also in different languages. I should have said this at some point, but I have newcomers who I like check the book out from the library in Spanish so that they can also
So,
follow along. So it's a little Spanish is easy to find. There is a version in Vietnamese. So if you are a
okay.
teacher and you have newcomers, you can get the book in a different language so they can still keep up.
Amazing. Um, Thank you again so, so much. I hope you
Thank
have a
you.
beautiful day. Yeah, much love, gratitude, respect. Um, Everybody, that is it for us. Thank you so much for joining this episode of The Paper Plane, speaking with Dr. Katrina Traylor about Trevor Noah's memoir, Born a Crime. We hope you enjoyed the flight. Peace.